Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Bull Breakdowns here on the Guilty as Charged podcast YouTube channel. I'm here with two guests today, my fellow writers at Chargers Wire, my boss, Gavino. How are you doing, Mr. Managing Editor over at Chargers Wire?
It's quite the introduction, man, but I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself?
Uh, Doing all right, other than the news that apparently Antonio Gates did not make the Hall of Fame and
Snubbed.
Chargers legend Dwight Freeney did, which the social media just posted. I cannot believe that happened. But we also have Alex Katson in the building tonight. How are you doing?
Doing good, except for the Gates news, like you said. One of the worst Hall of Fame snubs that I can think of in recent memory. But we press on.
Yeah.
And excited to be on the show.
You know, Philip Rivers was like one of those guys where it's like, yeah, that's gonna. Well, I was gonna say Philip Rivers was one of those guys that I thought is gonna be borderline in a couple years when we get to 2026, but Gates not getting in was pretty surprising to me on the whole. But moving on, we do have Chargers coaching staff news to talk about. Greg Roman officially named the OC. Jesse Minter officially named DC. We have Marcus Brady as passing game coordinator. So what do we think about all these news? I'll start with you first, Gavino.
I'd say the hiring that I'm most excited about is Jesse Minter. I mean, we kind of expected it all along. Like once we saw that Harbaugh was coming, we kind of anticipated that Minter was going to come. But seeing it actually become official, that was pretty exciting because, if you've watched Michigan for the past couple seasons, you know that their defense has been dominant. You've watched them this past season, especially the playoffs. Taking out Alabama, Alex's Washington Huskies too, and the way that their defense is played, it's aggressive. They're flying around to the ball, and the Chargers haven't had this in years. So bringing in someone that has that mindset, a player's coach, it's someone who I think is going to mold really well. Obviously, the personnel, we kind of know who like the key guys are on that defense, but I'm excited to see who they bring in. And we're going to get into some guys who could be fits, from the Shrine Bowl, Senior Bowl. But my biggest takeaway is just Jesse Minter, and then the offense. Let Alex talk about that. Indifferent is probably my word I'd describe how I'm feeling about the offense.
What about you, Mr. Katson?
Yeah, I think to kind of touch on the offensive side of it, I do think that obviously the Roman hire is something that, again, we all kind of expected to happen, but is still perhaps a bit underwhelming. I think there were a lot of people, myself included, that were pushing for him to be brought on in more of like a run game coordinator role or like a senior offensive assistant or something like that. I do think that it will help the Chargers in the sense of like Roman has proven that he can orchestrate a very good run game out of like spare parts, essentially. And so I think if you trust Justin Herbert to elevate an offensive system to begin with, which you should, because he's been doing it for the last 2-3 years at this point, I don't think that the Roman hire is like that much of a catastrophe as it's being made out to be by some people. Obviously, it's not the outcome that everyone wanted, and so I understand the catastrophizing and everything like that. But I do think that it's going to marry well with what Marcus Brady does as pass game coordinator. There's a lot of he was the guy that was the offensive coordinator like the last couple of years of Andrew Luck in Indianapolis, with Philip Rivers in Indianapolis the year that they made the playoffs. And so I think there's a lot to like there in terms of like the passing concepts and everything that they kind of put together in that offense. And so I think marrying that with the way that Roman is going to scheme up the run game and trying to kind of find a nice balance, which I think can be expected under Harbaugh. I mean, he's a coach that has had multiple play callers on the same side of the ball before. And so it wouldn't surprise me if Brady is pretty heavily involved in game planning and play calling, that sort of stuff. And so I think that it will be fine. I think that, again, it's not the greatest thing in the world. I know there were a lot of guys that were available that had connections to Harbaugh that people were a lot more excited about. But I think ultimately it will be, if not optimal, it will still be competent, which is, I think, still a step up from what we've seen from the Chargers in the past couple of years. So I'm still excited for it personally, but I completely understand if other people are not.
Yeah, Jesse Minter is awesome. I mean, I didn't know if they would be able to get Harbaugh from Michigan first, and then also getting Minter thrown in as kind of a bonus is a great thing for this defense. Kind of getting more of that, Mike McDonald Ravens scheme, in here, very physical, fast defense. Unfortunately, as Gavino mentioned, as Katson saw in the national championship game, as I saw my Rutgers Scarlet Knights starting out with a 7-0 lead and then proceeding to get pounded by that defense. So it is a great scheme to bring in here, and there's obviously a lot of draft fits that I think make a lot of sense. That if the over under is 1.5 or 2.5 Michigan players, it wouldn't shock me if we get some of those key defensive contributors here for the Chargers. My first thing with the Roman, I don't know. My first reaction was kind of anguish, although I've coped over the last 2 days to the point where I'm sort of thinking it's okay and that they'll survive. Um, the interesting thing about it is I just didn't think of Roman as like, okay, well, we want to update the Harbaugh offense from 10 years ago in the NFL to now. Who's the guy? Oh, the guy from 10 years ago who got fired at multiple jobs. All right, well, now he is. I do think he is a floor raiser for the offense in terms of what he can do, for the run game. And obviously, I don't think it's going to be quite as bad. And this is a point that Daniel Popper made on the Locked On Chargers podcast, which was, John Harbaugh, very much more of a delegator of tasks who basically just kind of gave Roman the offense and said, hey, run with it. And you go back to Rex Ryan in Buffalo, who essentially did the same thing. I think Jim Harbaugh does want to be a lot more offensively involved. And so from that standpoint, I do think he knows how to kind of reel in Roman and embrace what he does well, in addition to kind of building around, his weaknesses. Obviously, I think that's why Marcus Brady was here and kind of why it was announced to some extent as a joint hire for this offense. My camera keeps going out. Sorry about that. But yeah, I'm interested to see what this offense looks like. Obviously, we brought up the fact that in San Francisco, it was sort of this joint play caller effort, with a couple of guys there with Roman, including Eric Mangini. I forget the name of the quarterbacks coach off the top of my head. I just tweeted it today, who was in San Francisco at the time. But it was this, kind of group of play callers depending on the situation. And then we also saw that at Michigan. So I do think the Chargers will employ do some of the same thing. And then we saw Shane Day come in here a little bit. So, yeah, still having troubles with my camera. So I will get that resolved as soon as I can. But I will throw it back to you guys. We also saw that Shane Day, like I said, was just hired today to be the quarterbacks coach with Justin Herbert. What did you guys think of that move?
I mean, I understood. Like, we're talking about Justin Herbert being in whatever system he is, like dating back to when he was at Oregon. Like, I mean, bringing in someone who he's familiar with. Obviously, when Lombardi got fired, he went with them too. And, it was a move that I wasn't too surprised, about. Like, it's just a familiar face that Herbert's, used to, and just getting someone in there who he's knows. I think that's kind of what they're going for with that hire. More so falls on Lombardi for the offensive woes, but I don't think any of it's on Shane Day. So they saw that as a veteran coach, bring him back. He was with the 49ers. He's been with other teams too, dating back to like 2006. So yeah, I understood the move.
Yeah, I think that Day is kind of a nice bridge between the Harbaugh connection and the core of the Chargers offense connection. He spent some time as a quality control coach with the Niners. I think I guess maybe that was the year before Harbaugh got there. But it's kind of similar sort of stuff. And I mean, Day was the pass game coordinator when Herbert threw for 5,000 yards. And so, like, there's clearly, and like all of the tweets about him getting announced made some mention of the fact that like Justin Herbert himself is a fan of Day, which I think is definitely notable, especially for a quarterback entering his second contract with a completely new coaching staff that he has no familiarity with. So kind of hiring like essentially someone that he's comfortable with, someone that he is a fan of, and someone that he likes as the quarterback coach, who is essentially kind of like his personal like uh, buddy for all of practice, all of training camp, all of everything. I think that that's just like I think that that's kind of the first, perhaps like quote unquote Herbert hire that we get as we kind of transition into Herbert on this top 10 quarterback contract. But I think that it's a nice kind of bridge between like what Harbaugh and Roman and Marcus Brady want to do and like what Justin Herbert wants to do. And so kind of having that medium and having that voice in the coaching room that Herbert can kind of suggest things to by proxy to be brought up in meetings, I think is a prudent move for this coaching staff because obviously like the number one priority should be keeping Herbert happy because he's going to be making $60 million a year. And so, making sure that he is in the loop kind of game planning wise, that's kind of how it read to me, at least with Day getting hired. And so I'm a fan of it. I was a fan of Day when he was here, with the previous regime. I think that he's a good coach. I'm excited to see how it goes with the Chargers the second time around.
Yeah, and I was just thinking about it today. I don't totally know what the number of offensive coordinators is since Justin Herbert's time at Oregon. Didn't have time to totally research the numbers, but it's his 8th or 9th, right?
Yeah, I think we're up to 7 or 8, I think.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
7 or 8 offensive coordinators since Justin Herbert took over as the starter at Oregon. And so, I think introducing yet another system, not to a guy that's incapable of, learning systems, obviously, but introducing an element of familiarity into that, I think is important, as I think this is probably the most significant shift in like the offense he's probably had since, going from Lombardi to Moore and now to sort of a Roman Harbaugh, Marcus Brady hybrid system, if you want to call it that. So, yeah, this is definitely the biggest change he's had. I'm very curious to kind of see how he adjusts to it. And so, yeah, no, I think bringing back Shane Day in this kind of a context is pretty important for Justin Herbert, just to even have a guy that he can kind of soundboard off of that he's familiar with in terms of some of these, passing concepts. So I think that's a great move altogether. And obviously, the file that he has of the 67 best Herbert plays can, be faithfully restored to the servers over at SoFi. So congrats to Shane Day for obviously getting a chance to come back. And it's, pretty rare, I guess, that we see, former coaches of a different coaching staff kind of get brought back in this kind of a way after,
especially so
Kellen Moore.
soon.
Yeah, especially after Kellen Moore.
Rip.
Moving on a little bit here, I do want to get to we'll get to the Senior Bowl, Shrine Bowl stuff shortly. I do want to make a quick mention of the Chargers picking up Mike Elston as well, and the rating of Michigan continues with Dylan Roney, who they got over there, Jesse Minter, and now we have this move with Mike Elston and potentially going up after Steve Klinkscale as well. Who may be coming over, but is sort of in the limbo, seeing what his role at Michigan will be. What do you guys kind of think about this in terms of a draft context after being at the Senior and Shrine Bowl, or also just from a Chargers context, what Mike Elston can bring to this team with Harbaugh and Minter?
Go ahead and just plug in Bowers, Neighbors, however you want to go about it. Round 2, Chris Jenkins. True. No, I'm just kidding. But I mean, if they're going to bring like the whole coaching staff, like I see like at least like two Michigan guys that they draft. But heck, bring them all over. Like I'm excited. Like I told you about the Jesse Minter hire. Like if they're going to bring most of that defensive coaching staff over that had the success that they did, or helped have the success that they did, like more the better. So as the news keeps coming out of this positional coach coming over, like I'm eating it up, and I'm sure fans are, or they should be too.
Yeah, I think the Elston hire is particularly exciting. Obviously, he's been the defensive line coach at Michigan the last couple of years. Before that, he was at Notre Dame for a long time. He has produced a ton of draft picks, especially along the interior of the offensive line. You go all the way back to like Lewis Nix in 2014. Sheldon Day is a Notre Dame guy that he coached. Jerry Tillery, Chargers legend, was a Mike
Ooh, we're trying to sell the audience here, and you just said Jerry Tillery, man.
Yeah, but
high draft picks. I get what you're saying.
high draft picks, right? Like high draft picks. He had some edge rushers. Khalid Kareem got drafted. Dalen Hayes. Like some of these guys that came out and like basically anyone that came out on the defensive line from Notre Dame from 2010 to 2021 is a Mike Elston product. Obviously, Michigan's defensive line was fantastic these past couple of years. Like Gavino mentioned, like Chris Jenkins is kind of the keystone of that. But I would also not be surprised to see like either one of the edge rushers end up on the Chargers because of this, whether that's Jalen Harrell or Braden McGregor. I think Jenkins is probably the likeliest of those, just based on kind of piecing things together. I think you had mentioned earlier about if the over under is 1.5, 2.5, whatever it is, you can probably think about taking that over. I think that Chris Jenkins is probably a key figure in that, especially if he's available at that second round pick at 37, and especially if the Chargers trade down and collect some more day 2 picks. As far as like clink scale and all of that goes, I know that there's still like a little bit of vagueness around that, just kind of like uncertainty around like whether or not he's actually going to leave or if he's going to be named defensive coordinator at Michigan or like what's going to happen with that. But I think that would be a great hire as well. I mean, again, like Gavino said, just like anyone from that Michigan defensive staff, like is worth taking a look at and worth bringing on because that defense is phenomenal. And so, anyone that you can get from that, I think is going to be someone that can kind of elevate what the Chargers have been doing the past couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, if we get Clinkscale in here, I can start plugging in my guy Mikey Sanders still into more mock drafts. Always a big fan of doing that. Chris Jenkins in round 2, I think, would be kind of a dream possibility for a team that really needs it on the interior defensive line as well. So overall, kind of would be thrilled with any like combination of Michigan defensive players you could throw out there. I like Jalen Harrell a little bit from what I've seen from him on tape too. So I do think all of these additions are pretty positive, not just from what you can get in the draft, but obviously the development of some of the players that are already here. And the way that is just going to kind of change the way that the Chargers do things over here, because I think from a talent development standpoint in particular, like that's really what this team's lacked. Like they've obviously hit and missed on their fair share of picks in the Telesco era, but obviously the thing that was lacking with Brandon Staley was consistent development of some of those, later day 3 picks, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, outside of, a couple here and there, like Alohi Gilman. So I would like to see obviously more development, and this is a piece of the Chargers becoming a contender, is just more development down the roster, and guys competing for those spots, as opposed to the Chargers kind of being barren whenever injuries do happen, and we see that a lot. Let's get into the Senior and Shrine Bowl specifically. I guess my first question is, whenever you guys get to go to this stuff, like how important is the Senior and Shrine Bowl for these players and these organizations, and like what is kind of happening, I guess, behind the scenes at the Senior and Shrine Bowls?
Yeah, I mean, I think the parts that we and the general public are able to see are definitely the less important parts of the Senior and Shrine Bowls. Really, it's a chance for teams to get interviews down with players. It's kind of your first big interview opportunity before the combine. There's a lot of guys at these games that aren't going to be at the combine, and so it's kind of like your one chance to interview them without bringing them in for a top 30 prospect visit. It's a lot of like medical testing, like personality testing, just like kind of just putting these guys through essentially the combine, but without having to go to the combine, but then with practices and a exhibition game attached. I do think that the practices are important. The game is kind of meaningless in the grand scheme of things, but the practices are important. I think they're not as important as they're sometimes made out to be, especially at the Senior Bowl, where if someone has a good week of practice, all of a sudden they're moving up 1-2 full rounds. That's not really what ends up happening most of the time. But it's definitely an important event, a keystone event, and just being able to get eyes on kind of like who the Charger staff and staffs around the league are keeping an eye on and what they're watching during the practices and like who they're kind of keying in on is always some worthy intel to get as well. Last year when we were at the Shrine Bowl, we happened to see 2 area scouts basically only scouting offensive line and defensive line, and they drafted Jordan McFadden and Scott Matlock from the Shrine Bowl. And so, it's kind of like you can kind of draw the line between those two things of like if they're paying attention to something in particular, they're probably going to be looking that direction in April. And so from our perspective, I think that that's always an important part of it. But yeah, for the most part, it's just a fun time.
Yeah, it's a good time, and it's a good time to meet up with Alex, of course, too, and just meet up with other people that we interact with on Twitter every day. So, I didn't get to make it out to Mobile, but I met with Alex in Texas for the Shrine Bowl, and that was eventful. It started out with me driving in the rain, and I don't know how to drive in the rain, so I almost literally drove into a median just because I couldn't see. I live out in Arizona, so I'm not used to the rain. Unlike today, it's actually raining. And then finish out the event with going to the wrong rental car place. And
Yeah.
Alex almost missing his flight because of it.
Banner week for Gavino driving. It was really good.
But yeah, just a good time overall, and just connecting and watching these players up front. So
yeah. Let's get to some of the standouts, I guess, of the Senior and Shrine Bowls that you guys saw in your time there. Obviously, my favorite player is Max Melton. So, you get a chance to do propaganda for him here, but in a more broad sense, tell me, but from both of you, who were some of the maybe your like top 3, standouts kind of at both events, maybe?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. And I'll start with the obviously the Shrine Bowl. I was able to watch some Senior Bowl tape at Shrine Bowl. Offensively, Chargers are going to need a tight end. Dallin Holker from Colorado State was the more notable player there, and he flashed out what he did at Colorado State. He had his best season, and he's really good as a pass catcher, yards after the catch guy. I project him as like a round 3, maybe round 4 guy. But I'm going to go a little bit deeper, and I like Tip Ryman from Illinois. Like, if we're talking about the best blocker in this year's class, it's Tip. Like, I want him to be a Charger. Like, that's a round 5, 6, just a day 3 guy that I think they would benefit from. But, I was able to talk to him. So not only did he show off his blocking skills, because I watched the actual game, and dude was phenomenal. You watch his tape, he blocks his ass off, but he flashed as a pass catcher too. And the word on the street is that he's going to run really well at the combine. I saw something like Pauline put out like 4.6 or something crazy, 4.5. But he should test really well. So, for people that don't know about Tip Ryman from Illinois too, you're going to go look at his stats. The first thing what people are going to do, it's not going to be anything eye-popping, but you turn on some Illinois tape, he's going to block his ass off. And, with this new offense, we know that they covet tight ends. They've taken 2 in the past. So he's my target because he's got some juice as a blocker, but he can show some stuff in the passing game too. I know Alex got to watch him a little bit too. And what do you think of Tip, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I think I echo most of those sentiments. He's a fantastic blocker. That's going to be most of what he does in the NFL. I think he's 270 pounds. So, like, he's essentially a sixth offensive lineman. Came in at 6'4", 273. Um, does move really well for being that giant. I think that uh, he's got kind of a weird route tree to him. He moves a lot better coming outside than going inside, which is kind of strange and backwards to me, but it's cool. And so I wouldn't be surprised if he runs really well. He's someone that I like as well, kind of like in the fifth, sixth round range. Kind of moving to the trenches, I thought that Hunter Norzad, the Penn State center, was really, really good. I know Steven's been tweeting about him in the last couple of days. But he was someone that I was really impressed with. Wasn't like super on my radar coming into the week, but left it as like, oh, I should probably have watched him beforehand because he's probably going to be a fourth or fifth round pick. If you think about kind of like the way that Drew Scruggs from Penn State last year was viewed as kind of like a center who could also play guard, kind of was looked at as like maybe more of like a day three guy coming into the Shrine Bowl week, ends up going into the second round of the Texans. I think that if you kind of scooch everything down a few rounds, you get the same kind of thing with Norzad. I thought Mason McCormick was awesome, also the South Dakota State guard. He played a little bit of center at the Shrine Bowl as well. Obviously, the Chargers have a huge need at center, and so that's something that they're going to be keying in on pretty heavily. The Charger scouts that we saw in Frisco were keyed in on the offensive line pretty heavily. So I think that, again, that's kind of something to watch. And then on the other side of the ball, Northern Iowa defensive tackle Christian Boyd might have been the best player at the event, which was insane because he's a FCS defensive tackle. But he won pretty much every single rep that we saw him in. And he's kind of like he's my sleeper pick for a Chargers pick on day three, probably like round 5-ish, because in Minter's defense, like your defensive tackles have to be able to move and they have to be able to stop the run and rush the passer. And so if you can't get one of like these big headline names early, I think that Boyd is going to be a popular target for guys that miss out on a Chris Jenkins or a Johnny Newton at the top of the draft as someone that you can kind of plug in as a situational, like rotational kind of defensive tackle. And I think that he would fit what Minter runs really well.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see what the Chargers kind of do at center in particular because a lot of fans obviously want Jackson Powers Johnson. That seems less likely to happen now unless they trade back into the first round potentially. And so you're talking about a lot of like second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth round guys. And Hunter Norzad obviously is someone who has Ivy League background, and now went to go play at Penn State. Curious to kind of see what he could potentially bring to the table. I guess also you bring up the point of Chargers scouts, and we just actually got the news today that JoJo Wooden, who was at both the Senior and the Shrine Bowls, right,
Yep.
is now leaving to the Raiders. And I think it was Joe Ortiz who commented on this at his press conference, but they're probably not going to like shift, scouting staffs in particular until post draft, right? When a lot of contracts come up. They did hire Chad Alexander as well as Corey Kraweiss to front office positions, as well as director of personnel and assistant GM. But I just kind of wonder, how does kind of the front office fluctuation maybe change what the Chargers are kind of getting to see in some of these prospects at these events? Hard to really tell until we know come draft time, but it can't be, I guess, an easy thing for them to go through this transition where Joe Ortiz basically just gets here. He's obviously doesn't seem like he was present really at either event. Obviously probably got updates from scouts and things like that. But I guess, how do the Chargers kind of like navigate that as they're scouting this season?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up because I hadn't really put together connected those dots until just now, but we did see, I think, more Chargers, like more people in Chargers gear at these events than I've seen in the past 4 years of going to these games. And so I think that kind of reflects a more aggressive approach to like getting boots on the ground and watching it, because there is so much fluctuation. And it, like JoJo Wooden was down there, but so was national cross checker James McPherson, who's like national cross checker is basically like the national scout that the Chargers have. They had 3 or 4 area scouts that were in attendance. They had a couple people from the personnel department that I didn't recognize. A lot of people were like, "Oh, Jim Harbaugh's hires," and it's like it's probably just people that I don't recognize because I don't have a bio on the website. But there were, I think 6 or 7 Chargers personnel people, including JoJo Wooden, that were in Frisco, and then 4 or 5 of them that made the trip to Mobile. And for a scouting staff that isn't very big to begin with, historically it was not very big under Tom Telesco, like was maybe 10 or 11 people total. Like that's a pretty big contingent to send. And so I do kind of wonder if maybe that was partially motivated by the fact of like, there's sort of a power vacuum. Obviously, the Ortiz hire happened while the Shrine Bowl was ongoing. It was kind of in the middle of that week. And so I do wonder if it was a little bit more like, we're just going to send like everyone that we have still on contract, and we're just going to send them out there. And that way, if some of these guys, if we lose some of these guys because of staff attrition and everything, we still have some people that were down on the ground, doing everything. And then obviously like Ortiz and Alexander and Kurweiss, all of those guys have been, preparing for the draft all season. It's not like we hired them off the street or anything. And so, they're all getting their notes from their scouts that were out at those games, from the Ravens, from the Jets, from, all over the place. And so like they have some background, but obviously like marrying that with what Harbaugh wants to do, what Ortiz's vision is for this team, is going to be a little bit more of a collaborative process than I think it is sometimes in NFL front offices. And so I am interested to see how that plays out, but I do think that it probably is explained a little bit by the fact that like they had 6 or 7 people out on the road, which is atypical for the Chargers.
Yeah, you guys got to see the inner workings of this, where Brandon Brown, essentially was kind of confirmed sort of at the Shrine Bowl to sort of like be back with the Giants and not a, final or, not the final pick for the Chargers job. Seeing that turn out the way it did. I guess, I think that this is going to be a really interesting process to see how it affects the first draft. And, for somebody like Jim Harbaugh, right, making it sure that like he, as well as Ortiz, kind of get all of the possible information that they can get in this time seems like it's going to be kind of a critical, thing here at this juncture for this team to kind of move forward and obviously fill the roster holes that they need to. I know Gavino already told me 2 of his Shrine Bowl guys, but I want you both to give me one guy that you would pound the table for. It can be Senior Bowl, Shrine Bowl, but just they fit the team so well, and you would pound the table for them.
Go ahead, Alex.
I'll pick a guy from Senior Bowl since we didn't really talk about our standouts from there. But I will go with Christian Haynes, the Yukon guard. I thought he was really impressive in Mobile. Was someone that wasn't really like the, again, like not the most highly touted guy. There were some cornerbacks in Mobile that did really well as well. Obviously, Max Melton, the Rutgers guy, I tweeted about him a ton. He had a really good week. Quinyon Mitchell was fantastic. That ship looks like it's basically sailed. He's going to go in the top 20, I think. Jarvis Brownlee from Louisville was also really, really good. He's another guy that I like for the Chargers. But Haynes, again, has guard center flexibility. Played like a little tiny bit of center in Mobile, and it's just mean, which is like what you want from an interior offensive lineman. There was one rep that he had in Mobile where he beats the defensive tackle so bad that they get into a scuffle afterwards, and then he pulls the guy's helmet off, and then it's a whole thing. He's tossing it into the stands, and some people that were a little bit closer to it, like out on the field, said that the quote from Haynes was, "If you're scared, go to church." And so, just a guy with that attitude that also has like that level of talent. He's 6'2.5", 318, almost 34-inch arms. I believe the Chargers went out to a couple of UConn games this season. I don't have my sheet in front of me, but I think they went out there at least once this year. And so I think that he's going to be someone that's more of like a middle round target, maybe like a third, fourth round pick. But that's kind of, I think, the sweet spot for where the Chargers should be targeting offensive line to begin with. Just like, if they're not going to take a pure center in the first 2 rounds, then you want a guy that has some flexibility. Obviously, we'll see how free agency goes and everything. I kind of expect them to add a free agent center. But if they, go that route and then they need, depth or someone to compete for a starting spot, like in the third, fourth round, I think that Haynes is a great fit for what they want to do, what Harbaugh wants to do, kind of like just a perfect marriage of the vision with like the player. And so he's a guy that I am really keeping an eye on for the Chargers.
I've got 3. Obviously, I've got more, but I've got 2 from Shrine, and then I got 1 from Senior Bowl. So talking about the back end of the defense, Adrian Taylor Demerson from Texas Tech. Chargers are going to need to upgrade that safety room. And with Jesse Minter, he likes to build the secondary out as opposed to the inside. So he's going to be looking for some dogs back there. And he was one. He finished off with like 200 tackles at Texas Tech, but he's got terrific closing speed, sticky in man coverage. You watch his tape, he's got the range to make plays, deep. He's not afraid to come up and hit. Like I said, and I feel like with Minter, if you can't hit, you're gone. Like I said, that's the thing that making tackles in the open field. That's you watch Michigan, you see their defensive backs just doing that. So he's a little bit on the smaller side, but he's got that speed, he's got the range. And the biggest thing, another thing, he was excellent at communicating. Like I said, if you can communicate on the back end of the defense too, like that's another bonus that a lot of people don't talk about. So going the middle of the defense, Curtis Jacobs, the Penn State linebacker, I think he's going to be a round 3 guy. I think I'd say round 3. But if we look at the amount of games that Chargers went to watch Penn State, you got a lot of guys right there. And the linebacker room, we don't know what that's going to look like. We got Deion Henley and then everyone else, assuming that Eric Kendricks could be like a cap casualty. But he can play good coverage, and that's something that the Chargers have not had, good coverage linebackers. So again, the closing speed, he's got the range. He can stick with tight ends in coverage. And he was actually used as a blitzer at Penn State. I think he finished off with 9.5 sacks, I believe, too. So just coming downhill, you notice that. And then going in the trenches, talked to Alex about it. Like, I gave him a call, and I'm like, hey, how did Justin Egbebe, how do you pronounce the name?
I have no idea.
Egboigbe from Alabama, the defensive tackle. So watch this tape, especially the Michigan game too. He really flashed in that game too, but really strong at the point of attack. He's a good technician. Just plays with a high motor too. I highly recommend watching that game too, where he pops. And the interior part of the defensive line is going to be interesting because you've got Morgan Fox, Tito, and then like Scott Matlock. But I think people are expecting like Devondre Sweat, like these like big guys, like we got to stop the run. Tired of that. They need some athletic guys. Like, we're going to see some guys like 290, maybe 310 going there. So we got to stop. They got to be able to twist. They got to be able to stunt. They got to be able to move. We're past this Jamal Williams era. Like, we're getting some guys who can actually move, who can stop the run and get after the passer. So, like Boygby, I believe I'm pronouncing that right. He's another guy I'd pound the table for. So those 3 guys I'd pound the table for.
Yeah, I mean, obviously a lot will be made of Roman Wilson's performance at the Shrine Bowl, at the Senior Bowl as well. He popped on tape and even had Quinion Mitchell's number a few times, which, kind of surprised me a little bit. Before he, announced he was coming back last year, he was a guy I kind of was like, he could be like a round 5, round 6 target for the Chargers potentially last year. But now, obviously, he's probably going to go in round 3, round 4, maybe even slide into round 2. I mean, with a lot of the hype that's building around him, I think you can, who knows really what the future is for Keenan. I do think that he will be on this roster for 2024. After that, do you need a Keenan replacement, or do they kind of want to, move in a different direction? I don't know, but he's one of those guys that could be there. And then, I'm happy that everyone else is getting a chance to watch Max Melton. It's been a really big, treat. He just plays with this kind of insane hustle. Reminds me a little bit of like Casey Hayward, a little bit, where
Mhm.
he just kind of had that great closing speed, breaks on the ball, kind of a ball hawk type dude. And then I've also seen him just, chase 40, 50 yards from the other side of the field to save a touchdown against Ohio State. He just has like really insane hustle and drive as an athlete, as his brother Bo Melton for the Packers does as well. So he has that kind of NFL a bloodline in him for sure. So those are the two that popped out to me for Senior Bowl. I know there's quite a few names. I know Steven's guy Sion Vaki, who can play 45 positions, was at the Senior Bowl as well. So Chargers have a lot of choices to churn through here with new leadership. So hopefully, some of those Senior Bowl, Shrine Bowl guys we mentioned will not be day three flubs of this new regime. Hopefully, we get some new choices in there and we all enjoy the draft a little bit more than we have recently. So, thank you to Alex and Gavino. Alex, you got anything? Final thoughts for tonight?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Make sure you follow all the stuff that we're doing on Chargers Wire. Gavino and I are still working through interviews that we did at Shrine Bowl, including a bunch with guys that we talked about on the show today.
Mm.
Norzad, probably the most notable one. I have that one in the drafts. We've got a lot of ones that we're excited about. I think we have 24 between the two of us that we're working through
You
to post.
mentioned
So
Chris Boyd earlier. I've got him. I mentioned Tip Ryman. I have him and Dallin Holker, who, if they don't go Brock Bowers, he could be an intriguing mid-round target for the Chargers too. So I think I got most of the notable tight ends, McCollum Castles. So yeah, I would say um, tight end, and defensive line like Miles Murphy from North Carolina. He's another guy I didn't mention, but he's also intriguing, could be a fit for the Chargers. So yeah, we have a lot of interviews coming.
yeah, so we've got all that coming down the pipe. So make sure you are following Chargers Wire and following all of us for all that stuff. But yeah, otherwise, thanks for having us.
Yeah. Gavino, you have any final thoughts?
All I could say is better days are ahead, Chargers fans.
Yeah.
This is going to be an intriguing offseason, that's for sure, just starting with free agency and what they do. I think the cap situation, it's overrated. People are overthinking that. They'll be fine. But as far as who they're going to let walk, who they're going to bring back, and who they're going to sign and just draft, like I'm sure we'll be on here maybe one or two more times before the draft goes. But yeah, it's going to be a fun off season just under this new regime. But yeah, better days are ahead. Jim Harbaugh is the head coach of the Chargers. So.
Better days ahead. Good day three picks. Not getting beat by 42 to the Raiders. All ahead, Chargers fans. So, as always, bolt up and see you guys next time.